remember before he hits live, or do I have to interrupt him in the first question? That is the question. That is what everybody wants to know.
This is where we say carrots and peas, carrots and peas.
Exactly.
Watermelon cantaloupe.
Yeah, exactly.
Watermelon.
People who tune into YouTube are all probably like, why do they keep on talking about carrots and peas? It just makes me hungry before the show. I don't understand.
That's right.
All right. Okay. Hey, everybody, welcome to Office Hours. If you're on YouTube, you can join the conversation in Zoom. You'll see a link down below. If you're here as an attendee and you're wondering how all these fine people became panelists, they got here early. We have to be here by 6:40. Now, we start doing mic checks sometime between 6:40 and 6:43. And closer to 6:43, but you should be here by 6:40 because I can't promise anything after that. We'll lock the panel after that. We actually get started earlier than that. Informally, we start with a meeting at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Then people come in and kind of mill around. We've got a couple breakout rooms, and and if you're wondering how to get into that, that's in the email that goes out to everyone, the agenda that no one reads. It's there, and there's links there that you can get into the meeting. And there's actually a meeting. We're doing meetings before and after the event, so you guys can all just keep hanging out. And then at 6 we really start the webinar. Now, eventually this will all be merged together when webinars provide breakout room. But right now it's a meeting and then a webinar. And at 6 we start kind of warming up and really getting ready for the show. And then 6:40 we do the mic check. 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock is always general discussion. Any question you have around media, around technology, around virtual events. That's the time to ask those questions from 7 to 8 every day, 7 days a week. So you can really have this is the way office hours should have existed in school. Not the 3 hours in Wednesday afternoon, but every day you can come in here and ask questions. So anyway, you can come in here between 7 and 8 and know that we'll address your questions. I don't know if we'll answer them. We'll do the best we can. And then at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, we usually have a specialty. Monday's kind of a wild card. Tuesdays are audio, Wednesdays are video, Thursdays are artists or some type of thing towards artists. Fridays are more production, like events. And Saturday is a focus on education. Sunday is just 2 hours of us chit-chatting. We talked about preamps yesterday, which was a great conversation. Today we're going to talk about sensors, camera sensors for video. Tomorrow we'll brainstorm a little bit about what people could be doing for concerts and music. On Friday we're going to catch up with Zoom. It's made a lot of changes, and a lot of us are working in events. So we're going to kind of cross-pollinate what we know about the new changes in Zoom and just general questions about Zoom. And then on Saturday we will have we'll talk about education. Let's focus on education every Saturday. So if you're an educator, if you're working as an administrator in e-learning, college, professional, K through 12, we have a great panel that has kind of built up around that on Saturday mornings. So it's definitely worth checking out. Also, if you want to share this, you can go ahead and share it, but don't use your own link. Don't use the link that you used to get into this. I'll post this in Discord, not in Discord, but in Mokana. So there's a link you actually want to use to join the event. And now we'll jump into the questions. The questions look there's not as many as we usually have at this time of day. So we just want to encourage everybody to jump on those. And if you try to scratch your brain and think about things that you could be asking, because it'll be a real short show or just a lot of long subjects if we don't get more questions. So go ahead and think through that. And Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the first one.
And it comes from Art Bly Jr. in Cupertino, who wants to talk about bone conduction. Anyone know about the headset that does something with your ear bones and does not actually have to be in or over your ear?
Go ahead, Stuart. Nope, he's having. Oh, there we go.
I ruined something.
Well, we had a picture there. We saw a picture. We were optimistic.
Yep. Looked very interesting, Stuart.
So while Stuart's working on that.
Okay, while I found the microphone thing, which was already unmuted, I was trying to put up a image, the first one I found, of bone conduction, which is this stuff, which, there we go. Okay, so where it says bone conduction and the arrows pointing, that's where you would actually have the headset resting. That's the same as what's used for some forms of hearing aids where somebody might have damage to the eardrum itself. So the sound waves are passed through the bone to the small bones inside the inner ear rather than coming through the ear canal and then into the damaged drum. These sorts of headphones work the same sort of way as that. They pass the vibrations directly into the bone. There's supposed to be advantages on the quality of sound, especially for anybody who, say, is over 40 and might have a loss of hearing. That's what they do. They literally rattle the bones backward and forward inside the ear directly rather than using the sound to do or the air pressure to do it.
There's a couple of things that are kind of interesting about bone conduction. One is that it's not as dependent on the exterior sound. So you can have, it'll be there. It's not obviously it's not going to have the same quality of sound. You're not going to hear it. It's not going to sound like a 20 to 20K stereo, whatever. It's, it could be stereo, but it's not going to be as the same quality. But it has you have a couple odd advantages. One is that you can have bone conduction and have earplugs in at the same time. so you can be somewhere where you're able to talk. I worked in some environments where we had bone conduction on one side, and then you can have a mic that you actually push up against your throat. And then you end up in a situation where you can communicate with other people where it's pretty loud and, without having, you can have earplugs in and, or anything going on. You can still hear what people are saying and they can hear what you're saying. And it's not using air to do any of it. It's using air to some degree, but it's using mostly vibration. So there's a couple different ways to make that work. The Google Glass, actually, when the Glass came out, it was using bone conduction for what it did. So when it went over your ear, it pushed up against it, and you could hear people at a fairly good quality. And as I said, it's clear in certain ways, in ways that you wouldn't have it be clear in with your standard audio. But it also is not the same quality. So it's really good for speech, in my opinion. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I would think that where it would roll off would be at the top end. So if you're one of those stereophiles who loves hearing the brushes on the cymbals perfectly, you're probably going to lose a little up there at the upper registers.
Yeah. But it's a really interesting technology that can be used in a lot of places. Hopefully that makes sense. Next question.
Moving on to Hugo from Portugal. Says, does the panel know of any web camera with a depth sensor other than the iPhone?
The iPad. Sorry, I had to say it.
So
they're Google, had a solution that they were using for a while. But Andrew, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so Intel for a time ran a webcam series on their RealSense platform, and that was both a stereoscopic 3D sensor and a RGB sensor that had aligned frames. So you could do some really cool computer vision stuff with that. Then Razer went and made a consumer version of it that you could plug in as a webcam device that was popular for a while. I think that is sort of retired now, but there still are RealSense cameras available that are compatible with things like OpenNI for people who are interested in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and for some reason it's escaping me what they called the Google solution for the phone. I don't know why it's out of my head at the moment, but we used it a fair bit, and it was very effective. It was very similar to what Apple's doing now, but it was the biggest problem with it generally on the phone has been dealing with battery life. And even now, if you take your iPhone and do a bunch of LiDAR, you'll.
Uh-oh. Do we have a freeze with Alex? Is it just me or?
Yeah, he's
No,
frozen.
it's Alex.
He's frozen.
Well, that would be.
Didn't that one
his
camera, the multiple lenses camera, didn't that also have a depth sensor?
Lightroad, yeah, the light field camera.
Notice your battery.
We got a piece of you, Alex. So your connection is trying to reconnect. Nope, I don't think it's going to get there. Anybody else have
Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I know. Whether it's Wi-Fi or remember he had the problem with the turkey vultures on his microwave, so he may have a flock that's decided it's too cold where he is. Whoops, then I saw him refresh.
Followed him to the hotel?
Yeah, could have. Yeah.
And
Okay, he's
back-
intermittent enough. Well, rather than keeping the show from going further, does anybody else have any things to say about not bone conduction, but camera depth sensors other than the iPhone? We're getting, Alex, if you can still hear us, we're getting 1 frame every maybe 4 or 5 seconds of refresh, but nothing more than that off of your video signal. And your audio is completely cut off. So there we go. I guess what we have to do is move on to the next question, and hopefully Alex can fix that, or his provider can. Rick Coombs of Columbia, Tennessee pops in with the next one. I have several thousand sermon files that are in MP3 format that I'd like to put on Amazon Cloud Search. My hangup is converting them to XML data, which is what AWS Cloud Search requires. What are my options? And Alex is back. Alex, no, he got another freeze. He's so he was in the middle of answer, and somebody who was looking for that answer. Are you there, Alex? No, we can't hear you so far. Your video is back, but we have no mic. Give him a second to see if he can figure this out. No,
He's trying to do this on Bluetooth, right? That's our problem.
Yeah. We all have been here when you're trying to find exactly the right path and the right switches and buttons to push. He's looking for a second, and we'll definitely give you a second to figure things out.
So much for that kit.
Yeah, do not duplicate that travel kit and send it out to 1,000 people. Whoops, and he's gone again. All right, so we're going to move on. Alex can run back to that if he needs to. So we're talking about the sermon files, MP3 format. He wants to put them on Amazon Cloud Search. His hang-up is converting them to XML data, which is what AWS Cloud Search requires. What are the options for getting searchable text strings or something from the MP3 format? Sky, you want to pop in? And
Well, at least expensive that I found is TEMI, and that will at least get you a transcript file, which is pretty accurate for like 10 cents a minute. You can do a more expensive version, which is adding a human to the transcript. Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
yes,
Hello.
we can. We can hear you now. Can't see you. Yeah.
So this, I thought it was, so here's what happened is I ran out of, it was taking power from the ATEM switcher, and I was like, oh, it's powering the laptop. not enough to run Zoom on the laptop. So anyway, so I was going along all fine and dandy, and then the whole computer just starts slowing down. And fortunately, I've had this happen a couple times, so I know what it is. So I ran and got my power supply. But this is the bug. I figured I would show it to you now because I can see it. This is the bug that we're seeing. Sorry?
We're not seeing your video.
Right.
I know that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This is the bug that we have been seeing with Zoom, specifically with the ATEMs and with sometimes other cameras, is that I jumped out of Zoom, quit it, then came back into Zoom, and I'm showing up as a gray box. So this is the bug that we're seeing, just so you know it's there. And we're going to try to fix it. I'm going to try to fix it by dropping out of, I'm going to try to restart my computer and see if it comes back in. So this may be a little bit of a lab while you're working, but it's useful for us to know that it exists.
Right,
it's been a little bit of a, it's very.
Before you do that, have you tried to change the resolution on the ATEM Mini from whatever frames per second to the next one up or down?
Already 2997, and it's the only option I have in this piece here. Now I can try to go to, let's see if I go to FaceTime. There I am. So I can go use FaceTime if that was there.
What happened to me is I had to retarget in Zoom my camera to the new one after I restarted everything. It came back just like yours did to an alternate camera. And then so I had to switch back to Blackmagic to get that reset.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey, and then Guy.
Yeah, I've had that happen just yesterday on an ATEM Mini Pro, and I just had to reboot the ATEM. Unplugging and replugging it didn't do anything, but a reboot of the ATEM for some reason fixed it.
How do you reboot an ATEM?
Pull out the power, plug it back.
Oh, that's what it said, unplugging and plugging. I thought you meant, I thought there was a button. I was like, what's going on? So I'll disappear here for a second. Oh, I won't disappear because I'm in my web camera right now. So we're having a little bit of a learning session here. So we're going to reboot the ATEM. I've unplugged it and now I'm plugging it back in. And
is it to renegotiate all the USB connections to Zoom, and it should show up again.
But it seems like Zoom's having this negotiation issue with audio devices, with video devices. It's there. It is. little warm. I think somehow it
Kalaka.
took over a connection. But anyway, that's so the fix there was to pull the power out of the ATEM Mini and then plug it back in again, and then we got audio and video. So I've been hoping that this would happen at some point where we could actually test it all together, and we did. And Mickey figured it out quickly because that's what Mickey does. So anyway, so go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I mean, like it's been mentioned. This issue has been mentioned a couple of times in the past week, and then like, oh, I've never had that happen. I've been saying that. But yesterday, was it yesterday or earlier today? Yesterday, it happened. Finally happened to me.
Yeah.
During a VO session.
So now 100 and some of us have figured out what to do. Go ahead, Guy, and then Hosmer.
Yeah, this is why we wanted to get those little 3D printed stands. Excuse me. Because of that heat issue. I believe that's what's causing this. And so, yeah, I was having it happen to me where I just kept having to unplug it and plug it back in. And once I got these, oh, hi, kiddo. Good morning.
Mine is not hot at all. It's mine is not warm at all. So it's not, I don't think it's a heat issue. I think it's literally there's some negotiation going on. And we've seen it with like minutes after the ATEM's running. And then we've had this problem. I'm having this problem also with my USB pre, where when I come back into Zoom, it's not, I just don't see the levels bouncing, and it's not using it in Zoom. It's seen by QuickTime. Like for instance, with the ATEM, if I open up QuickTime, I can see myself in QuickTime. I just can't see it in Zoom. So it's a Zoom media connection issue with both audio and video that we're seeing happening. And it started happening a couple weeks ago. I thought it was connected to either Big Sur or the M1 chip because I was testing it on a Mini, but I'm on an Intel chip here. I'm on Catalina on this computer. So was TJ, who had the same problem. So this is a Catalina Intel laptop, not an M1 or Big Sur. So I think I'm starting to triangulate that it's Zoom's fault. So we should, anybody who's seen it or even thought about it should probably report it as an issue to Zoom. If there's a surge of 20 or 30 people saying that they have it, we'll probably get more engineering attention than if I just do it. So something to consider. Go ahead, Hosmuk, and then Mickey, and then George.
I must confess, I've had this a little earlier, 2-3 months ago.
Okay.
And specifically with the huddle cam. And what I had to do is switch to the huddle cam through the USB connection, and then go back to the Blackmagic where I have the same huddle cam through the HDMI. Then it may or may not work. But most times I had to repower the ATEM.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems that repowering the ATEM has fixed it. It worries me because I'm sending out kits. So that's this problem. It's going to be like, can you unplug the ATEM and then plug it back in again? It's not going to sound great. Mickey and then Stuart, or Mickey and then George and then Stuart.
Yeah, I just want to share. Like the machine that it happened on is an Intel machine and also on Mojave, so it's not a Big Sur thing. I don't think so.
Right. Go ahead, Stuart.
Not hearing anybody saying they're having the same issue on a Windows PC. So is it a difference in Zoom for Mac that might be causing it?
Definitely could be.
I think it's a security chip. I really do.
Could be some connection to the security chip is possible. Yeah,
and I never had that before. 4.4, the Zoom .44 upgrade, and you were saying that on Windows it's 4.3, so they may be a version behind, maybe something to do with that.
Yep. George, did you have something?
I did, just real quick. So I've been having that same problem too. Right now I'm bypassing the ATEM USB-C. I have a Ultra Studio 3G connected to my system too, but it's coming to pass into the ATEM. So that's what you see me on right now. But I've definitely been having problems with the mix pre and the ATEM, going black, and just have to reboot everything.
Yep. So I think that we're getting pretty close to thinking that it's an issue with Zoom, not an issue with the hardware or the operating system. I mean, it might be related to the operating system, being that it's a Zoom on the Mac appears to be the issue. But anyway, so where were we before I I disappeared.
Well, you were talking about the question before this, which I could go back and get. You were right in the middle of an answer. When you weren't back, nobody else had add-on, so we moved to Rick Coombs' question, which
Okay.
is
Do we want to finish that question? Do we just want to answer whatever it was that I disappeared from?
Let me go back into answered questions here, and I'll read it to you, and you can tell if you want to go back and recover it or not. Does the panel know of any web camera with depth sensors other than the iPhone?
Oh yeah, and the only thing I was going to say is that Google was putting it into cameras for a while, or into their phones, and they gave up. The other one was the Microsoft, with the Xbox. A lot of us used their little
Connect. Yeah.
the Connect. So the Connect became a hacker's tool where we were all grabbing, writing code to grab data out of that Connect for a long time. In fact, there's whole businesses built around those Connect sensors. So those are all part of that pipeline. I think that the reason that Apple's been more successful is they've done it a lot slower. So they spent a lot of time getting us ready for it on one WWDC after another, for years. They slowly put out hardware, and this is I think that what a lot of other companies miss, and I think it's a good lesson for us to see is watching someone build a pipeline and build infrastructure for something, so that when the hardware comes out, the software and the preparation by the developers is already there. And I think Apple's done a much better job at that than everyone else did. And so as a result, there's hundreds of applications that are already using it. They're ready. All they had to do is, they were already tracking things with the parallax, and all they had to do was add LiDAR. So by getting out early, I think that other folks, what they missed was that key kind of prepping the ground to expand. And I think that's why Apple's probably going to be pretty successful at people using the hardware. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just going to mention that of course, a lot of people forget about the HoloLens, which is still out, still working, and that uses basically the same sensor, or is an offshoot of the same sensor that Connect used.
Yeah, and the HoloLens is great. It's mostly industrial, so Microsoft kept it kind of more in the pro market, and so it's probably going to stay there. I think that the big thing is that, and I think they've been successful at it, but I think the Apple's about to hit the mass market with it. I think Microsoft might have planned to do that, but Apple's pretty far ahead now. So we'll see what happens. The head-to-head will be good for us, all of us, as they go down that path. Anyway, next question.
Okay, moving on to the one that we got halfway into before, and I apologize to Jeffrey, who has to figure this all out in his links. But Rick Coombs from Columbia, Tennessee, I have several thousand sermon files that are in MP3 format that I'd like to put on Amazon Cloud Search. My hang-up is converting them to XML data, which is what AWS Cloud Search requires. What are my options?
Courtney?
Well, I'm confused. I'm not sure whether he wants to make the actual text of the sermons searchable, or does he just want to have those files searchable by file name, and maybe a tagline or something. So I'm not sure what he needs there, because XML would be more of a metadata thing in the file, IXML perhaps, or in MP3 it would be in the ID3 tags. To search for a specific name, like the artist name, the sermon name, and there's certain requirements that go into the MP3 tag structure that you might have to have it formatted. I'm not sure what Amazon requires. Maybe anyone who has an Amazon experience can tell me what they need.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to channel my friend Phil Hodgetts, who years ago when I first met him and we started talking deeply about metadata, used to tell me over and over again, the value in metadata expands the earlier you can attach it to files all the way across the universe. So the process of going back and affixing metadata to a file after it already exists in a system is really hard. To do it while you're creating the file is vastly easier. And in fact, there are a lot of automated processes that can make it so that you don't even have to attach this kind of metadata. And I'm assuming, just like Courtney, that he's talking about the XML data, about when it was done and the topic.
The hardest part about metadata is when something strips it out, when you move through it. So it's also why some of us still pay attention to folder structures and naming conventions, is so that when you lose the metadata, there's still some idea of what's actually going on. You always assume worst case scenario and you add the metadata to it, but you put enough in the name. So hopefully you have that in the name. There are some, we'll probably need to ask another question there related to what you need the XML for, because XML and MP3 are two vastly different. One's a sound format and one's a data format, and we're not sure exactly what you mean there. Go ahead, Stuart, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, Alex, in the chat, Rick's actually added searchable by file name. So what I'm wondering is there an audio application like maybe Pro Tools where he can import all those MP3s and then assign the metadata in that and export an XML with
the big thing
MP3s?
is just figuring out a batch function that can look at the name. I mean, there are definitely we do that for files. I don't know about inserting it into the XML or metadata related to that. We do that with files all the time, where we, you look at the name and you can make a bunch of decisions about where they go and what they do based on their name. But it depends on how strict your naming conventions are. We'll open this up for a little bit longer. Courtney, and then Bill, and then Mickey, and then we'll bump out. But try to keep it quick.
Yeah, MP3 only has ID3 tags, which are standardized, and maybe what Amazon's looking for is broadcast wave files, which do have IXML chunks, which are metadata chunks, and maybe and a lot of requirements for cataloging programs are looking for that broadcast wave IXML chunk, which has information about the file name and when it was recorded and that kind of information.
In the old days, we would have used an app called the Babelizer, which just had, you would be able to write a script and drop a bunch of files on it. It would do all the things that needed to be done. But I don't know of what's available right now. Go ahead, Bill, and then Mickey.
Yeah, there are text parsing programs. If the problem is that they're all MP3-0001, 2, 3, 4, 5 ad nauseum, and there's no real data there are programs that can go find out the creation date and insert that, and maybe insert the word sermon in it and things like that to post-process them. But it's much easier to get it right beforehand.
Well, yeah, but you can't. He's already got them. so the we just had to find, for us to figure out what app that actually is. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I just skimmed through the white papers of Amazon. It seems like you can create an XML file, which is would essentially act as a search database for Amazon. So you can have your own. You can customize like what columns you want, and then those could in turn be.
So really,
search
it's
terms.
grabbing the data, just grabbing those files and putting pointers, in
exactly.
XML
So
to where to go.
I would assume like he would want to, for example, get the ID3 tags, which has, things like artist, album, and such, and be able to transform that somehow into an XML. On my end, like say, I use sound effects library management software, like say SoundMiner. SoundMiner creates an XML file as its database, but it's a very proprietary formatting that it uses. So maybe you can use some sort of sound library management software, create that XML, and just edit it to match what AWS might be looking for.
Yeah, AWS may publish a schema, which is what's basically called a template for an XML file.
Exactly.
Schema.
So you could just
they may
transpose
publish that, which shows all the fields that they're looking for in their XML database.
Jeff, you're going to have a last word.
I'm not even sure I'm going to come through because it looks like my video is way behind.
It is.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. Okay, I was just going to suggest stuff about tagging the MP3s like in iTunes or a tagging software, and maybe once he gets that info set up in the MP3s that they will import.
I think the big thing is trying to figure out a batch process to do it rather than doing it by hand. It sounds like he's got a lot of them, so I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, he said several.
You could at least get the artist and those kind of things logged in. As the church.
Usually the way I approach it is I try to find something where I go, how do I make 10 of these work? How do I make 10 of these work? How do I make 10 of these work? And then once I get 10 of them working, then I apply it to everything else. so the that's probably the approach. But we'll keep on putting it in the back of our head. Maybe we'll find it. Next question.
Sure. Moving along to Stuart Fairweather of the panel, who says, for Andrew, tell us more about Zoom OSC.
Well, with pleasure. I am, so just again, by way of introduction, I'm Andy from Liminal Entertainment. I'm the creator of Zoom OSC and manage it both on Windows and on the Mac. So this program is something that I created to try to make Zoom more adaptable for the type of work that we do, right? Where we're integrating it with events or in live theater or things like that. So what I've done is I've added an OSC interface to Zoom so that you can control it through things like the BitFocus Companion for your Stream Deck, or through media servers, or through Touch OSC on your phone, or really anything that can send this standard. We've built out an API of different functions and commands that give you quite a bit of control. And it's a free tool that we distribute, and everyone's welcome to use it. We have a public Slack group where people with experience on using OSC protocols or on using Zoom OSC itself are teaching people who need to learn, or are in a high school program trying to do a show, everything up through off-Broadway creative work and international peace conferences. So we've got quite a few use cases. It's an actively developed project. We're coming up with new features every single day. And it's part of our ecosystem of things that we do with Zoom, including, I guess, which I'll share with you, Zoom NDI, which we'll be releasing very soon to give you NDI ISO feeds of all users in a Zoom call. So those are the kind of things that we're thinking about and working within our SDK with Zoom, and those are the kind of things we'll be rolling out soon.
And when you do the Zoom NDI, are you able to get separate audio channels, or are they still merged together?
It's coming down merged from Zoom itself. So that's the difficulty there, is we can't part that back out. Now, we do have some other thoughts about how we might be able to get around that, but it wouldn't involve going directly through Zoom. We also have some technology we call Streamweaver, which is another method for both protocol transport and AV transport. And that's kind of how, when we have a client who needs that sort of support, we push them that direction. It works with Zoom, but it's its own routing infrastructure to help us get around that kind of issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what do you think are the chief limitations for the API, Zoom's API, that kind of limit where you're able to go?
Well, the big thing is that the API lags behind the vanilla client seriously. Like things like multi-pinning, multi-spotlight, rearranging the gallery view, those features aren't available to developers yet. So none of the integrations are going to be able to implement any of that if they're based on the Zoom SDKs for desktop. I will say that the other huge limitation, which has just changed, is access to raw data. Raw data, the pixel information has been restricted from developers. Unless you had some sort of inside route with Zoom, you weren't going to get that data to be able to make apps that do things like what we're doing with NDI. Very recently, they announced a program for developers to allow you to get access to that raw data. However, they haven't supported it on desktop clients. So you can do this stuff on mobile, you can do the stuff on web, but you can't utilize the native app implementation with the SDK to get raw data still, which is a huge limitation for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to be talking about Zoom for an hour on Friday. We're hoping that you're going to join us.
I will definitely try to be there. I'm looking forward to that. We saw a bunch of downloads from office hours, and I figured I'd check in and see what's going on and hope to be a resource.
That's fantastic. Well, hopefully we're going to talk about a bunch of Zoom, but yeah, there's a lot of Zoom conversations here, and obviously if you see the downloads, there's a bunch. We tend to work as a pack. so once someone gets into it, a lot of people get into it, and they all start playing with it. So Andrew, it's so great to have you here. Thanks for
having me. I appreciate it.
And I definitely would love to encourage everybody to download it and play with it, so that we as a group, now that we know that we have someone to talk to, we should start playing with it. And well, for a lot of us have already been playing with it, but I would heartily encourage everyone watching here to.
Is Andrew familiar with the Discord?
Andrew, we'll get you a Discord.
Yes, I've just joined this morning.
Okay, perfect. So
and Makana.
And we will maybe we'll get a section up there so that at least Andrew has somewhere to check in every once in a while as we're trying to figure stuff out. So someone remind me of that in the RFIs, and we'll get that set up. I got a couple of restructuring things that are overdue. So, all right, next question. Thanks, Andrew.
Moving on to Art Bly Jr. of Cupertino. If I stay on the panel first time, I'm wondering if there's a way for me to control my audio on my iPhone 10 with a Bluetooth headset. Note, I'm always having to pull my Bluetooth out of my ears when people start talking to me while I'm listening to things like office hours.
I don't know. You just have to have people stop talking to you while you're in office hours. I mean, I think that's usually the best way to fix that. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say that's why I think Apple and the EarPod Pros put that, environmental attack so that you can hear people around you at the same time the Bluetooth headphones are in. So I think more and more people are going to start offering that as an option.
I mean, my most common use case for most of the stuff is I usually have a single ear. So if I'm not listening to music, I'm generally have only one AirPod in. I do that for two reasons. One is because I can hear other people while I'm working. And then the second one is that the battery lasts longer because you just keep on switching ears and put the other one back in the pack. so you can work all day with your AirPods on if you're swapping ears. But that's generally how I've approached that problem. As only a single ear input. I do have problems where you end up with multiple comms and multiple feeds that you have to listen to, and you start running out of ears. So I'll have like ears in, and then cans over top of it, and I can get up to 4 channels that way, but it still gets a little confusing at times. Go ahead. Next question.
Moving on to Rick Coombs of Columbia, Tennessee, who says, getting a MacBook Pro with an Intel processor, we need Microsoft Office on there for cross-compatibility. Will this work with sharing with other Windows users and Mac users?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us have Microsoft Office that you can save those Word files out and PowerPoint files and Excel files, and they'll open just fine on both platforms. We do it all the time. We're on a 090 is on all Exchange and Microsoft Office and so on and so forth. So we use it pretty often. I use it to translate for everybody else because I don't use it as a core app. I only use it if I have to cut and paste stuff from Pages or Keynote into it. But it's but it definitely works. But I use it to translate to get to other people. Yep, Nikki.
Yeah, like I assume Rick is talking about sharing the actual Office files, which should work perfectly. But I wonder if he's also asking about sharing licenses. I don't know if they're multi-platform licenses that Microsoft offers.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, there's Office 365, which is their subscription base for Office, where it updates itself every year and you pay an annual license, and it's cross-platform. And that'd probably be the best way to go. And I think there's a version that you can license that's home and student. I think that's five PCs it allows you to activate it on. And that'd probably be the cheapest way to go. And it's, of course, all the files are cross-platform. And they give you a cloud storage as well, comes along with that license. So you have a common place where you can, cross-platform for different people to share files online.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, that's OneDrive, and there is a OneDrive for Mac that you can download and install. That way, when you call up Word or whatever document, your documents will be there to pull down.
Next question.
Mike Keeping of Burlington, Ontario says, wondering if anyone has tried the MacBook Air M1, wondering about a comparison to the MacBook Pro M1 or the Mac Mini M1. Has anybody got all three?
I don't know if anybody here has all three, I have the Mini, and the Mini is screaming fast. so that's, all I can say is that I'm kind of stunned as someone who's been a long time user of Mac Minis, since they were bigger and different and everything else. This is a pretty snappy machine for what it is. I got a gig Mac Mini. I'm just using it. I was going to use it this morning. I had some monitor issues, but I've been using them for Zoom, and I've opened up some different, resolve files in an 8 gig Mac Mini, and been kind of surprised at playback and performance. So it's pretty slick. But I don't know about the MacBook Air. I don't know anybody that has one yet. Almost everybody I know has been getting the Minis. The Minis have been something that a lot of us have been using them for. So anyone else? No. All right. Next question.
Art by Jr. is back from Cupertino with a follow-up question. Anyone know where I can find the bone conductor type of headset that we talked about earlier? Who sells them?
Well, I think that Amazon sells them, but we have to figure out which, so general, if you want looking for somewhere to purchase it, go ahead, Sky.
Well, there used to be those in-ear mobile devices called Jawbone. And I think they were a big chunk of that. So I don't know if they're still around.
I'm not, they may be. Anyone else? Anyone else's, let's see here. I don't, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Looking at on Amazon, there are them, but the one name that does pop out is called Aftershocks. I've seen them a few times before. So, but they're the standard bone over the ear things. I believe there are also some earbud like the Jabra, like Sky said, that have a little bit of bone conduction to it.
Yeah, and the ones that now that I'm looking at the pictures, the ones that I have tested in the past have been Aftershocks, and they worked fine. you know, again, your total quality isn't as high, but they definitely were effective as far as you could hear everybody clearly. Yep. Next question.
Rick Coombs of Columbia, Tennessee. Once again, what's the best mic for a physical trainer in a room with hardwood floors and hard walls and ceilings? Using a Logitech 920 into a laptop now, and as you can imagine, the room sounds extremely roomy.
The best mic is a carpet and some moving blankets on the walls. So anyway, that's the best. That's what's going to improve your audio the best. And so anyway, but barring that, you know, that's probably the least expensive solution is a couple moving blankets, a cheap. You know, you can get these little things that you can hang, you know, curtains by, you know, or you can hang backdrops from. They're like, you know, so for a total of $100, you can have actually a pretty good sound system that you can set up and break down in 15 minutes. But barring that, I would highly recommend, again, I keep on coming back to my sister-in-law she's in exactly the same configuration that you're talking about, except she's using a phone instead of a 920. She's using the Samsung 10T with a the Rode Go. She does yoga online. And so, so it's very, very close to what you're talking about. And she's been very successful at those, and it sounds really good. And in this crazy pollen thing is that she's doing yoga at something that my wife works on. So they're completely unconnected. They just see each other go by. And so evidently her audio and video are very good. So it's something to kind of consider there. Go ahead, Bill, and then Mickey.
Yeah, and don't forget the inverse square principle. If you take a headset mic and put it 1/4 of an inch from the corner of your mouth, but not so it gets breath sounds, the signal to noise ratio of the room versus your direct will be hugely better than what she's doing with the Logitech 920 and using its mic. That is tremendous orders of magnitude isolation better than using anything off your head, not near your mouth.
Mickey, and then Jeff, and then we'll move on.
And definitely treating the room, because a microphone won't fix the room. You'll just get less of it. It's still going to be a poor sounding room. So I would first try to treat it. In terms of mics, yes, especially for anything physical, headset mic as opposed to a lav, because a lav's going to be a dumpster fire with a lot of movement. So you want a headset mic for that. And then, of course, have it wireless. So you want your transmitter ideally in a waist strap, and with sweat protection, with liquid protection around it. We usually use like a latex glove and just, you know, seal it up with some medical tape, or an unlubricated condom also works really well for that.
Jeff?
Depending on how physical this physical trainer is, they may need to do something to, even with the dual headset, to attach it more firmly if they're moving around quite a bit. And if they're relatively in a same place in the room, they could get by with something mounted on the ceiling, hypercardioid, if they treated the room. At least that would get them closer than the laptop is if they have too much movement to have a mic on them.
I do think that if you got not a carpet underneath where you're exercising, but a carpet and then some moving blankets and a little, some stands in there, and then you put a headset mic in, you probably have it would probably be a dramatic change in the quality of the audio that would make it much more pleasurable to listen to. Next question.
Moving on to George Kennedy from the panel here in Washington, D.C. Alex, what are your protocols for freelancers interacting with your clients? Do you require them to stick to your playbook?
We tend to minimize the freelancers talking, not so much out of it's mostly so we know what's happening. So what we want our client to do for the most part is talk to the producer about what they want, and then have the producer figure out how to manage it. Where we get ourselves into trouble is clients making requests of artists or technicians who are then going down and doing a bunch of things that you didn't know that were happening, as a producer. And one of the things that as a producer that you have to manage is not just whether it can be done, but what can of worms does it open when you say yes? So you like the producer's job is to kind of think about, well, if I open that gate, when I say I can do something, or that I will help with something, I'm now accountable for that. So when something goes wrong, I go under the bus with whatever else was connected to that. So as a producer, you have to, as a technician or an artist, you may just go, oh, well, I can go do that. That's really easy to pull that plug out. They're not thinking about the fact that if I pull that plug out and half the building goes down, that I'm now accountable for all of that too, and so it's just a matter of managing risk, I think is the main issue. And then also just people getting overwhelmed. You suddenly ask an artist to do something or an engineer or technician to go do something. They're not paying attention to what they're doing, or something was supposed to take 15 minutes takes 2 hours, and now they didn't get back to their desk, and now they're behind on what you were getting paid to do. So those favors tend to be the reason that we try to manage communication with the producers or the coordinators. So sometimes if a small job, we'll have a producer. With larger jobs, we'll have producers and coordinators, and we just try to keep the client talking to them and trying to keep our technicians and artists to point people towards them. Now, there's definitely more advanced, there's busier meetings, and there's also more advanced folks that I work with that we just let them talk to the client directly because it's faster. And I just say, just keep me copied. And I just know that they're going to be able to, interact with the client on that directly. And so, especially as I get to know people, I'll tend to let them go. I just want to be in the loop. And then, especially on a fast turn, you have to do that. So it changes depending on the job, but those are the considerations that we have when we're doing it. George, and then Stuart, Courtney, Mickey, Bill, and then we'll move on.
So I wanted to drop that question because obviously a lot of these virtuals that we're doing, a lot of us here are a little more advanced in our thinking about what's going on in the virtual world, and folks that we're hiring are not, to that level yet. So I'm just trying to find ways, and it's happened a couple of times where, we're trying to stick to a certain playbook and folks are kind of throwing in their own ideas and kind of throwing everything off your playbook. So I just wanted to kind of throw it up to the panel to see everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is generally when people go rogue, which is what we call that. It's the last job they're going to do with us. Like that's the. I mean, so people, it's like talk carefully around us, because if you go down that path, there's two things that really. There's a couple things that bug us, but but one of them is speaking out of turn when you're going one direction and saying, oh, well, we shouldn't do it that way. That's usually the end of our relationship. And then, other things, that, I mean, that can be the main one. Being really freelancers that get real salesy, we don't hire very often. They want to try to, it's acting out of, I guess what I would say is overall they're acting out of scarcity. I mean, the reality is that there is so much work out there right now that we couldn't do it all. If all of us decided, I mean, that's what's there all the time. Like, there is so much work out there, and it's just a matter of talking to the right people and being able to structure it and being able to communicate it. But it is, just this right now in the land of virtual events, it's just an intense opportunity that you have to get you have to get in the right place and get around it. But I mean, it's just, I turn down more work than I do right now. And so it's just I'm trying to structure it. It's part of why we're doing this, is so I can find more people to work with. But the hard part is that it's just a matter of doing it. So when you start, people get very short term in their thinking, where they get into a job and they want to convert that job into another job next week with that client. For instance, I won't cross that line. If someone brings me in to work on a job, it's their client. I will never take that client straight on. Like, if that client, I've had clients come to me and say, I want to work around the company that brought you in. I won't do it. Like, I won't touch that with a 10. I won't try to sell them on it. And I definitely won't even take it on if they offered it. I don't care how much money it is. That, life is too short to get a reputation for cutting people out. Like, you get that reputation of cutting people out, and you're giving up so much. Your relationships are everything, and so if someone brings me into a job, I try to figure out how they're going to get included in that job. Like, it's not like I may do the whole job, but how are they part of that job, and how do they make money at that job? And then the other piece of that is that I will never work around a partner. Even if I never met them before, if they come in and they brought me in and I've never worked with that client before, in my eyes and in my world, that's their client. and even if they take 15% and I'm just doing, I'm just sending them a check, as part of the thing. I'm never, they know about it. There's a structure, but that is like a do not cross the line kind of thing. And people do it all the time. Freelancers do that all the time. And they just don't realize that you've now cut off. That person will never work with you again. And most of their friends won't work with you again. And that whatever you got out of that client, very rarely worth that loss. Stuart, and then Courtney, and Mickey, and then Bill, relatively quickly after I spoke too much.
I really wish you could teach that to a lot of people down here, because there's so many jobs that somebody will underquote and take the work away from you. And yeah, it's a bugbear, but as a freelancer, learn this phrase. I'm not sure I'm authorized to do that. Can you check with my department head?
Right. Or even just let me talk to the producer about it. Yep.
But be positive to the client. Make sure they know that you've got to check that it's okay and be positive about it. They'll go and talk to somebody who's senior. It'll come down through the chain of command, and you'll do the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Courtney, and then Mickey, and then Bill.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask, Alex, is when you're working with subcontractors that are bringing in their own hardware to some degree, and do you bill the client and then the subcontractor bills you, Alex? Is that your billing relationship normally?
Yeah, because the client, for our corporate clients, they don't want a new vendor. A new vendor is new paperwork. Right. Like that's for a large corporate client, they don't want another MSA. That becomes the issue.
Right.
Well,
this can lead to trouble when the client says, you're out there, and he'll talk to one of the subcontractors and say, "Hey, can you do this?" And the subcontractor will say, "Sure, I'll just have to add, let me bring in another camera. We have it in the truck." And if they don't check with you or don't run it through you, there's that, well, the client told me to bring it in, and you said, but you gave me a quote of this. And so I just ran into that recently on a thing. And my other pet peeve is, especially in the teleprompting business, because we're almost always either a contractor or a subcontractor, and a lot of times they're marking up our bills, which the person who brings us in as a subcontractor is want to do, of course. But the problem is that there has to be communication between the client and the teleprompter operator, because we got to get the scripts and prepare them. Right. And going through 3 steps of removal is always a problem in that time-sensitive area, where it's like I'll ask the producer, "Can you get us the scripts?" And he's got to talk to the client, and he doesn't want to upset the relationship between the client and be too needy, so he doesn't ask the client, and then we end up with not getting the scripts till the day of the shoot. And so that breakdown in community, I just love it if I'd say, "Okay, give me the client's number. I'll talk to him about the scripts and make sure they give us the scripts in time for us to have them ready to go on the set." Because a lot of times the intermediary producer doesn't want to get involved.
That's a pretty common problem. It's just not getting the questions asked that need to be asked to get our job done, because the client. Now, the other side of that is that sometimes you just know the client, and you want to package those questions in a certain time, and I've done it where I don't ask questions immediately, because if I asked all those questions, there's some. When it's done well, you're gating that so that the client's not getting an email every hour, that they're getting them in a meeting that you're going to have on Tuesday, and then you're going to go through those things, and you're part of that pipeline. And so, as an account rep, that's kind of your job, is to figure that out. But to your point, I've been on the tail end of that a lot, where you can't get the information that you need because the client or the partner internally, just the internal stakeholder, is concerned about talking to executives that maybe get frustrated if there's too many questions. So that's always the challenge, with that. So yeah, Mickey.
Yeah, on my end, in our company, we only have 4 engineers in house. Everyone else that we get to engineer projects have been freelancers. So for me, as the person who's handling the operation side of things and assigning work to engineers, it's very important for me to see the big picture of what kind of workload each engineer has at a certain time. So if they start going directly to the client and essentially adding to their own personal workload, I don't know anymore. I wouldn't know anymore if, say, I'm overworking this guy. Like, I'm okay doing 16, 20-hour days myself, but I do not let my guys I don't put them through that. So I want to see the big picture of how much what their workload is like every single day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing to go back to Courtney's point that that we make pretty clear with our contractors, if we do subcontracting, is that we will not pay for anything that we did not approve. Like, so if the client asks you for something and you pull it out, it's on you. Like, you're not gonna charge them for it. You're doing everybody a favor, but you're not, you have to, if you don't come back to us and get, we say written approval, and generally just means a text, hey, is this okay? And, or whatever, is fine. But there has to be something there to, or don't expect to get paid. Now, sometimes we do because it made sense and we did remember discussing it, but we make sure it's pretty clear to people that they need to get approval before they can start pulling stuff out that's going to cost more money. Bill?
I just want to double and triple and quadruple say that the whole industry is changing, and your reputation truly is everything now, because literally there are people in this panel right now who could mix your show in Manila, Philippines, that don't live there, and there are people who could mix this show in New York City who do not live there. Everything is virtualizing, so anybody can tap almost anybody around the globe. I could be editing a show for somebody in Milan tomorrow and it wouldn't change my workflow at all, which means that the only thing you have is not your local pool of people who can come to your shop, but it's the globe. So your reputation must remain as sterling as you can make it, or people will stop calling. And I've had on sets one bad word from a client back to me, and I will never hire that person again because I just can't afford it. So if they're not understanding this protocol of you don't snake clients from other people that hire you, they're just gone, and you'll wonder why you're doing no work. That's what
it's also why we tend to cut people out that are political. Say anything political on set, and we just don't know where our clients sit. We don't know where the other crew sits. You can tweak the entire flow of things by being a little off color, being which is pretty common in production, but being a little off color, being political, being religious. All of those things are things that we tend to, unless we're at a church, but outside of that, we tend to frown on all of those things just because we don't know where our entire audience is. And, we were kind of taking care of everyone. It's kind of what we do here, but part of that comes from just knowing that everything has to be kind of in a neutral space. That's your personal stuff is your personal stuff, and you should keep it that way when you're doing work. Next question.
Moving on to a Jeff Francis question from the panel. How do I export a text from Final Cut Pro titles, lower thirds, into a text file? Well,
you go ahead, Bill.
It's a little bit of a difficulty because we had hoped that because 10 is a database, maybe there would increasingly be links in and out of things, and you would be able to take a lot of your content from the database, or in this case, from the title generators, and have a clean export process. There really isn't one. Now, there are some XML parsers out there that will extract information from 10 and put it into a comma delimited or a tab delimited file. And I think Producer's Best Friend, and there are some others that you might be able to make work in that. I don't generally do that, but it's not a simple export text button that's hidden somewhere for you, Jeff. Sorry about that.
Glad to hear, because I was thinking.
Sorry.
This should be simple.
I think that there are tools to get it into Final Cut from a CSV or whatever, but getting it out of Final Cut is not.
Let me call Phil or Greg and ask them if there's any easier process now and ping you back.
I mean, the data's in there. It's in the XML. Like, that there's text. It's there. It's just a matter of finding it.
And it might be the Producer's Best Friend does that. That's the best reporter out of 10 that I know of. And it wouldn't surprise me if I found out that, it'll do the text titles.
To get geeky, it is a text file, and you could build a search term that says, go look for this field. Whatever
tag names are.
Yeah. So if you go through the XML, you figure out what it is, look for everything that has this field, look for the next, thing, and put that into a document.
And 10 has this brilliant thing called the timeline index. It's just a column in your database that has all your titles listed in there, and you can sort and search it. But I've never seen a function to export from the timeline index, which would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Unless that tool I mentioned does it, and I just don't know about it.
Or just copy and paste.
Yeah, exactly. But you could just copy and paste out of that too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Next question.
And this is the last one that isn't marked censor. So we've got 2 minutes to cover. Joaquin Behrens from Delft, the Netherlands. As we are now working mostly from homes, I'm looking to improve my home studio for the many, many web conferences that we have with my coworkers. What rigging do you suggest to mount lights, camera, microphones? Please entice us and show off your rigs. Oh, that's going to be scary.
Yeah, the rigs are of all ranges. That a lot of us use. This one I'm testing, so mine's probably a pretty heavy rig for it. I'm using it's my hotel rig, but I'm using a ATEM Mini Pro with a 6K and a Canon 24-70 2.8 with a MixPre 3.2 and then a laptop. And then I have two NAMs, two 68Bs, and then I'm using these little light stands that I'm really happy with. That I have to go. The ProMaster, they're like a LS-CT. Amazing light stands. I use them for 360, and we've kind of standardized them for lights, and they're just great. Anyway, that's my setup. Now go ahead. But I think that you don't need a setup like that. A C920 with a Pulson headset and a converter and a China ball is enough. I mean, so you can definitely do this for $200 or $300. And look 90% of what I'm doing. Go ahead, Sky, and then George, and then Jeffrey.
Well, I've been very fortunate. Early days, Guy allowed me to buy from him the ring light, which is a very encompassing. And then I've got just a standard old thing here with a $12 light bulb in it from Home Depot. The thing that you just talked about was the China bowls from Filmworks out of Burbank.
Or Film
and
Tools.
They just arrived. Film Tools, thank you. Yeah, they just arrived yesterday, and they're huge. But we're going to be trying those in the kitchen over at Madeline's, and I also got some black wrap, so I can kind of control it a little bit. But the Jeffrey Powers turned me on to the whole Newer, and those lights are pretty awesome. We'll be hanging those from the Manfrotto photo poles that we're going to kind of building a temporary grid, but mounting them to the walls so that we can have some flexibility. And John Iddleston just came up with, that corrugated plastic that you use in your backyard to see through. Well, they've got those wooden supports, and so he mounted those up on the wall, and so he can just go from divot to divot to divot up on the wall, up on the ceiling. So those are some options.
Go ahead, George.
So Matthew's Grip is your friend. You don't have to buy all of their gear, but if you want to look at rigging ideas, that's a good place. Guy, can you let them know what the pole was that you have going from the ceiling to the floor? You could actually put up those poles on the back of your desk, and you could get a lot of rigging done. Safeties is important too. Safety cables.
Yeah, you can kind of see this thing goes all the way up to the ceiling. This is the Matthews, or no, this one's Manfrotto auto pole, and then it just goes down, and then I'm rigging stuff off of it. Like, so here's a clamp, a standard super clamp, and it just clamps on the pipe and then turns into a 5/8 stud, and then you could clip on cameras and lights. I'll put a link in the chat to a guy who just built out pretty heavily a rig like this, where it's the whole pole with the camera attached off of one thing. But yeah, that's the auto pole.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So being a musician, I had a lot of stands that I could use, especially being a drummer. You can actually take some drum hardware, and I find that drum hardware works. If you get really heavy drum hardware, it works pretty well for doing things like putting lights on and things like that. I got a couple speaker stands that are holding lights in over there, but I also wanted to show you my main rig. And this really is if you're dedicating a room for that type of stuff. If you don't want to do track lighting, what I've done, that's not it. There we are. Basically what I've done is I went down to the regular hardware store and got those adjustable coat hanger rack things, and that goes from 48 inches to 72 inches, and that's what I use to hang. I have it hung on the ceiling, and of course you're seeing the Newer lights right there, and then of course a PTZ camera which goes right overhead here for head-on shots. So if you really want to dedicate a room for that, that's one thing. But if you have the spouse that's going, no, we're not going to do that, you might want to look at track lighting. That will probably be the easier way and more disguisable.
Right, Bill?
Yeah, I've got probably way too much going on here, as you can see. I've got multiple monitors. I've got multiple lights. Most of it is rigged off of the fundamental piece is I have this Middle Atlantic desk that I have had for probably 25 years. And it's great because it has a base thing and then a ridge up there. And both of those are solid planks that I can mount all the arms that take care of the lights and all the monitors. So a super clamp or the small clamps plus an arm articulated does that. And then I've got the one you can't see there, which is how I handle question and answer through here. And I'm doing now 2 laptops because I was getting tired of having my phone, which used to be on a little thing there, be my feed for Amazon or something I was pointing out to the group. It was small, but it just gets complex and you build and build more stuff up.
Who sits in that little Adirondack chair that's on
Isn't that cute? One of my clients did those as a send out one year, and they're for an iPhone. They're a little Giga gift for clients, has their logo on the front, and you can put your iPhone there if you will live in cubicle land.
That's great. All right, last question. I think we have one more question before we go to sensors. We'll keep it quick.
Yes, we do. And it comes from Anthony B. of Bridgewater, New Jersey, who says, Alex, there's so much work out there if you can talk to the right people. Any recommendations on who to talk to and how to reach them? My main method has been word of mouth.
I mean, the main thing that I do is I get involved with things that I'm interested in. You know, I'm always busy. So since I was about 12, I'm busy. And so if I'm not getting paid for it, I'm doing it for somebody, or I'm doing something. The best thing you can do is try to go out and find clients, even if they're not paying you at first. Volunteer at a church, volunteer at a nonprofit, volunteer somewhere. Get involved with folks. A lot of those folks, nonprofits have boards of directors. Churches have a lot of people that are involved in other things in the community. You just got to get in there and be useful. You treat every job like you're getting paid at least $100 an hour, or $200 an hour. You treat every job like that. You take on that Ritz that I've talked about, the Ritz hotel of, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen, that you hold yourself that way on set all the time. With every team that you work with everything, you're appropriate, you work hard, you're on time. And then it's just rinse and repeat. I can't say that it happens immediately. It's not like something that you can just go do for next month. But if you look at even, the way that this organization is set up, our little office hours, people that come in and take a look at stuff and then they're all chatting with each other. How you chat with people represents you. When you go to Discord, how you interact with people represents you. By giving people information that you've learned or figuring things out and answering them, that represents you, in front of all those folks. And then once you actually get brought onto a team, how you play, people are going to make decisions about when you interact with them about getting the job. If you make it weird, if you make getting the job weird, they won't call you back. So just do what you need to do to get to get in, to be part of that. Don't be taken advantage of, but you also, because you want to be trusting the person that you're hiring. When you don't know the people that are hiring you, that makes it harder. That's why part of why we're building this huge community is because if I hire someone in this community, I know that it will get back to everyone really quickly if I don't take care of them. And so, building that community is a big, piece of it. And so this community has that opportunity for a lot of people to, meet other people, be part of the groups. When we do trainings together, learning how to do those things. The way I got to Lucasfilm was I was on an AOL chat function for a chat group. It's like they had these bulletin boards in AOL, and I would answer everybody's questions. I didn't know the answer. Sometimes I would flippantly act like I just saw it and I answered the question. I'd spent like 16 hours on that question, like trying to figure it out. But very quickly, I just kind of went, oh, I looked at this here. You might want to try this. And it worked. But so I developed this huge reputation on the bulletin board as knowing what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just helping everybody and figuring out their solutions. And I did that for years. Like it's not like I did it for a month or a week. I did that for years while I was DJing weddings and doing other, working as, for $5 an hour or whatever. And so I learned a lot because I was figuring those things out. But I also built up a reputation so that once Lucasfilm was looking for, my name popped up, and the person at Lucasfilm had been trolling that location, not trolling, but like he was a lurker in the background. He goes, oh, I know who that is. They know he knows what he's doing. And then I got hired. And so the thing is that you, by sharing that information here in the panel, we know a lot about folks that are here. And we've already, I mean, we've already been cross hiring each other for other things within this community. So what I would say is number one is, get involved in the Discord, get involved in, doing useful things, helping people out, working on those things. Also, if you have knowledge to share, get on the panel, and share that, and, be appropriate about it and not be like, whatever, just be in this panel is taking people with experience and putting them in front of a lot of other people. And I don't think that's why people here do that. I think they do it because they love the conversation. But the point is that it provides opportunities when you're providing use back to everyone else. That stuff always comes back. I was talking to someone about it because I don't put money in the stock market, and I don't, without my wife, I don't really save any money. And someone was asking, well, what do you do? What do you invest in? And I said, I invest in people. I always invest in people. I invest in the people above me. I invest in the people that I'm hiring. I'm investing all the time. This is a big investment in people. And I said, that always turns out. That's putting your treasures where moth and rust don't corrupt. Investing in people around you, supporting people around you always pays off. The ROI for me over the last three decades has been stunning. You could, if I had that kind of ROI, I'm talking tens of millions of dollars by doing favors. No, I don't get to keep it all. I got jobs and I paid other people. But the point is that I've done tens of millions of dollars worth of production, and it's largely been driven by people who brought me work because I helped them when there was no reason to. And so you just have to remember that all those people making requests and everything else, you can't do it all. You have to manage your own well-being. You can't fix everything. I work in Africa and India and Cambodia and all the other places, and you can't fix everything. There's a lot of problems, but do find places that you can, but investing in community, investing in people around you is the payoff. I mean, it will pay it. It pays off. I mean, for me, it pays off just doing it because I enjoy it, but financially it will pay off over time as well. And so you just want to kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about it. I think that a lot of people try to figure out how they're going to flip karma into cash really fast. It just doesn't happen that way. Go ahead, Bill, and then we'll.
Yeah, I just wanted to double down on the social media thing. Sometimes you think you're just talking to the one person that you're in a conversation with, but there are a lot of people watching. I've been gobsmacked a couple of times in my career because I would be at something like it happened to me at one of the Apple events that I finally found out somebody was on the Final Cut team, and I introduced myself and they went, I know who you are.
Yeah.
I've been watching you talk over on this source for a long time. We can never interact, but I've seen you. And it just gobsmacked me to think that these are public things and people are watching, and sometimes they're the people who can hire you later in your career. So be real scrupulous about your public interactions.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is that, not everybody on this panel, I mean, there's a lot of people on this panel. I see the names of people who are in Mukana and people watching and people that are in the Zoom. There's a lot of people here, that are doing a lot of stuff. So you just want to, but again, don't try to sell, just try to be useful, be useful, and that's really going to take you, again, it's not the thing that, I don't do any sales. When I say I'm busy, I don't sell anything. It's all based on people saying, I hear you're the guy that does the thing, right? In some version of that. And that's all from working really hard and, treating it as serious as I do to get things done. And so, but that's the kind of what you want to look at. I know that we're going a little heavy, but we'll go ahead, Sky, real quick, and then we'll jump into
Yes,
census.
I'm just going to return. And as you say, we're writing our own story. And you started with, you went through the back entrance to the Ritz. And that's where you're telling your people, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for being a gentleman, sir.
Well, thank you. But that's, but we just want to, I think that a lot of people in production don't get that thing. I mean, they can be rough. They can, people on, your producers, if you get a job, producers are all paying attention. They just want their job to be easier. They just want good people to be on their team. So when you're shooting your mouth off or you're, late or not, or all these other things, they may not react. It doesn't mean they didn't hear it. And so you just have to, that's in the freelancing world, you're on call all the time, every email, every text, every phone call, every thing, you have to understand that you're projecting something, or, you're always projecting something, and you just have to decide what that projection is going to be. Anyway, let's go into sensors. I can only be here a little bit longer because I have to go to work. I'm in LA, which means I have a call time. So let's jump into sensors, and then I know that we have some very smart people here to talk about it. Let's go ahead, Bill.
First question. Okay, it comes to us from Stephen Kimbrough here on the panel out of Berkeley, California, and it has to do with back focus. What's a good set general steps that will not get you into trouble to have to spend an hour or 3 getting a good picture? So does anybody want to?
Stuart.
Firstly, we need to know, is it a DSLR or an ENG style cameras? Because some lenses have back focus built in. Some lenses need to be shimmed to adjust the back focus, and some cameras you can actually move the sensor to adjust the back focus depending on what sort of lens you're using. If you're setting up yourself with a lens that you can adjust the back focus, such as an ENG lens, have vertical objects in the frame that you can look at that are in the distance. You want to be able to set it with the iris wide open so that your depth of field is as short as possible. So on most cameras you will need a neutral density filter of some sort to cut the light level down to where it's reasonably exposed. You will focus and then adjust the back of the lens to get it even sharper again. And if you've got that Alex is showing up, which is the focus adjustment chart, you will get an even better focus. But if you're stuck out in the field somewhere, telephone poles will do.
So you can also find a picture of these kinds of things online. So you don't need to have this one. You can just download it and print it. There's nothing magical about this other than this one's printed really nicely, and it's with my color chart. But this is what we're going to use later today, because I've got 5 new lenses that I have to put on that are new for those cameras. And so we'll, and I missed what Stuart said, but generally we'll set it at a certain, we'll set it at 10 feet. Typically we set the lens so that the lens says 10 feet. And then typically we'll measure it out from that little circle with the is where your sensor is, the little circle with the line through it. That's your sensor plane, and so we'll measure that out and make sure that they're lined up, and then we get it in focus, and we basically with the focus set at 10 feet, and then the back focus, when you set that to 10 feet, it should be, and it actually is 10 feet, you should have the right back focus, and then you zoom all the way in and make sure it's still focused. Make small adjustments, and then zoom all the way back out and make sure it's still in focus. And so there's kind of, you're trying to make sure in an ENG lens that you're focused all the way through. That's what that's what your back focus is for. You can work without a back focus being back focused. You just need to refocus every time you change your zoom. so it's doable. We've done it. It's like flying with one engine. Like you put a lens on, you had to replace a lens, and it's not right back focus in the middle of a show. You just fly with one engine, and that just means you can't cut to a zoom. That's all. Bill, and then Stuart.
Yeah, so the traditional way on an ENG camera too, the last very thing where the lens mounts, the last thing up against the camera usually is a metal ring that has a little knob out of it that you can loosen, and then you can move back and forth. That is the back focus adjustment thing. So when you're doing this, you're using the shot and you're shooting it, you get, is exactly as everybody's described, you get that, try to get the precise focus, and then lock it down with your fingers, then zoom past the range and make sure that the back focus is good through the entire zoom range. But it's that little control on an ENG camera. There really isn't anything, when Stuart's talking about having to shim for like a DSLR, they're not really easy to perfect the back focus on. Hopefully nothing's changed and you've got the right lens distance from the sensor so that you don't have to mess with it, because it's hard to do.
Go ahead, Stuart, and then Nikki.
Actually, Bill, the ones for shimming are things like Zeiss CP2s and what have you on PL mount.
Yeah.
Where you can't move the sensor and what have you. But just one note for what Alex said about the markings on the barrel of a lens. Yes, on cinema lenses, they will be accurate. They will be amazingly accurate. But any modern DSLR motor-driven lens, expect them to be an estimation, not accurate.
Well, we don't even expect the DSLR lens to be back focused. Like if we put a DSLR lens on, we're trying to calibrate it, but we're not. We don't expect it to be. Mickey.
Yeah, and just to build on what everyone has said so far, every single mounting system, lens mount system, has its own way of back focusing. Well, some don't, but don't have facilities for back focusing at all. But say like Bill was mentioning B mount lenses, like broadcast lenses, that would, how you back focus those would differ from PL mount lenses.
Yep.
PL mount is usually on the camera side of things as opposed to the lens side of things.
Yep. Next question.
Okay, moving on to George Kennedy Jr.'s question, which comes up, and he's asking, why hasn't Blackmagic Design been able to deliver a global shutter camera? So we probably should
Go
define.
ahead, Stuart.
Because it's hard. It is not a simple thing to do. A decent sensor is a very complex piece of silicon substrate to manufacture. That's also why global shutters are not as sensitive. They're more expensive. They are a very complex piece of the sensor itself, the memory involved, the amplification involved as you go through it. It is amazingly difficult, and it's stunning that they even work in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, and what people are talking about, by the way, is there is a what almost all of our CMOS chips do is they actually are reading along the chip, so they're basically scanning along the chip very quickly, but not fast enough that if you are moving the camera, if something's moving ahead of you, that's where you see the little bend, or rippling. All those things are because the objects in front of the camera are in a different place than they were when they, throughout the just that one frame scan. And so being able to scan it fast enough and then expose it is a thing. For the most part, I think that it's a cost issue, where 95% of the time you don't need a global shutter. And so a lot of people can get away with it without it. That 5% of the time, sports and shaky cameras and, lots of, there's a bunch of things that you do need a global shutter. But you have to make a decision as a manufacturer, what part of the cost curve are you on? Courtney and then Bill.
And yeah, not only the cost, I think one of the big problems is heat. And that's why a lot of the early sensors, would shut off after 20 minutes that had global shutters, because you have to transfer all of those transistors have to be transferred and to another set of capacitors that are read out. And they all have to be activated at the same time. So that's going to
very quickly. Remember, we're doing this at 30 frames a second or 60 frames.
Within a 30th of a second during the blanking. So it's a heat issue. When you fire them all off at the same time, they don't have a chance to cool down. Right. And you end up with overheat problems, and then it gets noisy.
Bill?
There's also the interrelation that you have to kind of understand between the shutter speed, exposure, aperture, and these things that are all interrelated to get a picture into the camera. It'd be a perfect world if the shutter would open exactly the right length of time to charge the sensor perfectly, charge all the parts of the sensor. I mean, that's the kind of global idea you're trying. But in the real world, old DSLRs and things like that had a physical shutter that came down. And when they mapped that into video, you get this circumstance where maybe it was open, it started shutting, and part of the picture would be exposed differently than another part of the picture. You would get sometimes black at the bottom because the shutter speed and the exposure time didn't align. And particularly in photography, that's a big issue, because you'll get with flash, the flash duration and the shutter duration are not correct, and you will get literally half the picture exposed totally different than the other half. You map that into video, and particularly now that we've got these high frame rate cameras, and it gets more and more complex as you go along, trying to match all these aspects of picture taking.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Exactly on what Bill was just saying. If somebody wants to pause the Terminator movie with the star from Game of Thrones in it, I can't think of the name of which one it is. It's not the last one, but the previous one. But pause it during a gunfight, and you will see the top of the screen is bright flash from the gun flash going off. The bottom is dark. That's the rolling shutter, and that's exactly the same sort of thing Bill was talking about. Doug, who's normally a panelist, in the chat actually mentioned the Ursa Mini 4K cameras. Yes, the Ursa 4K, the original Blackmagic 4K, the AJA Scion behind me, the Flare or IO Industries Flare 12K all use the same CMOS sensor, and it is complex to do. The only other common camera that everybody will know of that has a global shutter camera is the Canon C700 GS, which is $60,000 to $70,000 Australian if you can find one. Global shutters are difficult, period.
And I think that one of the things that was known for that the Blackmagic 4 was the noise. So I think that might have been,
Yeah,
like
pattern noise
it
and
had
purple fringing. Yep.
Next question.
Moving on to Guy Cochran. Hang on a second, my mouse. There we go. Sensor, which manufacturer could we politely petition to create a Micro Four Thirds webcam?
I mean, I'd be happy. I mean, here's the worst part is the Precision HD from Cisco was 1 inch already. So it was close to that, but expensive. It was $400, $500. Now it's like, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was $1,000. And I was trying to figure out what I did with all of mine. But the 1 inch made a huge difference. I do think that I think people, if the pandemic lasts a little bit longer, we'll see better solutions. I'm kind of surprised that I still feel like Blackmagic, the fact that Blackmagic hasn't made a PTZ with a 4/3, just taking the micro guts and putting it into a PTZ is kind of amazing to me. That it just seems like they would sell more than they could, they would, like everything else they make right now, they would sell more than they could make, of those, because all of us would love to have, a high quality 4/3 even with a lens, kind of thing. Stuart?
I think a simpler solution would actually be to use a smaller sensor with a focal reducer, so you can use a larger lens on it. It would be easier to screw onto anything with a C-mount.
I think the issue, though, is
there are
that
people
the
that
larger
make custom ones.
The large sensor, obviously gives us just better light sensitivity, shorter depth of field. There's a whole bunch of things that we get out of that larger sensor that I think a lot of us, that Guy's pointing to,
Get all of that with a focal reducer.
You get all of that with a
focal reducer.
I don't know if you get it all. Anyway, Courtney?
Well, I have the MCOS, and Jeff isn't here because he knows a lot more about this camera than I do. And it has a C-mount lens, and I'm not sure. I thought it was touted to have a pretty good sized sensor in it, but I can't remember.
I think it's a 1 inch.
It's a 1 inch sensor.
I think so, yeah.
But at least it has interchangeable lenses, and you can do that you can find a lot of C-mount, 16 millimeter cinema lenses out there, but. Yep. And it has HDMI and USB out, which just makes it a nice webcam to use with an ATEM Mini.
Absolutely. Mickey?
Yeah, I think the manufacturer that could possibly do it the quickest and fast, that would be the closest to possibly developing something like this would be Blackmagic, because they have experience with making cameras with Micro Four Thirds mounts, and also working with the whole circuitry that would be needed for creating UVC devices.
Yeah, and I mean the other one that I think just it would take them a long time to make the turn would be Logitech. Logitech's already, building another version. I think it would probably end up being a $399, type thing, or $290, $299 or $399 would be another step up from the Brio. But I think that a Micro Four Thirds, to your point, a Micro Four Thirds 4K webcam that you put on, that you could buy would be pretty nifty. Like it would be there'd be a lot of people buying them. I think that, what's happened with the pandemic, the problem is that when you define these, it takes, I was talking to a manufacturer about this. Problem is you say, oh, that's a good idea. It's 18 months away. And so they're trying to figure out, is they keep on not with the vaccine, with all these other things. No one knows how high this demand is going to be for how long, for them to build, fab it, to actually build this in mass, to prototype it, to test it, to put it together, to build a pipeline for it, to be able to produce 1,000 a month or 2,000 a month or 5,000 a month is, there's an 18-month minimum turn on a lot of those things. We can all make quick ones, but for a large company to do it, that's like a minimum It's what I was told anyway. That's like a minimum turn of how long it's going to take. Go ahead, Guy, and then Courtney.
Yeah, one of the cameras that I'm using right now is the Panasonic G100, and it comes with this little like pancake 12 to 32 lens that I'm not using because it's not very good. So I've got the $700 camera with like a $1,000 plus lens. So there's the other problem is there's something out there, and they haven't released the beta yet for the G100, but for the GH5 they have webcam software. So we're getting there. We're getting close with Panasonic, but it's like who else? Who else? There's some corporate like Polycam and some of these guys that have been doing corporate boardroom style cameras for a long time, like the Cisco that you're talking about, that can do it. It's just somebody, I know as a group, if we all just said knock, 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 do this, we can create.
Those knock knocks are happening. I mean, I know a couple companies that basically budgeted $6,000 for 2,000 units. For their executive, like that's and I know some people on the far end of that or the tail end of that order, so, and because they were just like, we're gonna, and that was in March and April, because they were just like, people have to be able to communicate, and we need not have these little systems and their little webcams, and everyone got, managed. So I think the other issue that everyone has is that how many people are going to still want to buy it now that they have those, kinds of systems in place. And I think it also depends on how long the pandemic lasts and whether things are effective. And, if we're still here at 2022 trying to figure this out, I think that there'll be a new business because the whole industry will have changed. The longer the pandemic lasts, the more all these patterns are going to remain permanent. It's kind of like I was talking to someone about it the other day. I was like, a big tree has fallen, or a bunch of big trees have fallen in the canopy, in the Amazon, and all this underbrush is just exploding, and the question is will the underbrush get high enough that the trees don't grow back? So it just becomes, and it's unclear of how that's going to go. Courtney, and then I'm disappearing. I got to go get my car. I got to load it up. So I'll let you guys continue this conversation. Thanks so much. I'm going to try to figure out I will figure out how to start the meeting after this. So the after meeting will get started. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to happen yet, but it may be a couple minutes late. Be patient. But I'm going to try to get over to the venue and then turn it on and then make somebody a host and jump off. All right. Bye,
Have
everybody.
a good shoot, Alex.
All right. Thanks.
Who was on deck? Oh, Courtney. Yeah.
My question is, I haven't bought any Micro Four Thirds cameras in a while, but I would think, don't most of them, the ones with interchangeable, a lot of point and shoot still cameras that will also do video, don't a lot of them, almost all of them have USB micro or USB-C connectors on them for, getting data in and out off the SD card and controlling and updating the firmware. Wouldn't it just be able to do a firmware update, since they've got the USB hardware, to do a firmware update and put USB streaming into that? I guess you would have to have the processor would have to be able to handle the data rate and you got heat issues. But I would think a lot of cameras that, if they're built correctly to do video, should be able to output a webcam protocol over the USB port and turn it into a webcam. I know there are a couple out there that already do, but
yeah, I think you're exactly right, because that was what caused the Canon 5D Mark II originally to become the video sensation that it was, is because the Digic 4 processor they put in it, somebody figured out they could read that sensor out at 30 frames a second well enough to actually put a stable video stream out, and it revolutionized pretty much the industry in terms of changing the camera nature out there.
It looks like Guy is actually showing something on his screen.
Oh, okay.
He's
Cool.
busy, so hasn't spotlighted it.
Yeah, they have.
There we go.
Panasonic did release some beta software, but it's just that, it's beta. And for this camera in particular, this more inexpensive camera, the G100, it's not shipping yet. So this is for the bigger cameras, for the S1H and the GH5. So all these expensive cameras, but I'm trying to get, in the under $700 range for a webcam that has a Micro Four Thirds. So manufacturers are doing it. That's just not done. Sony came out with one and Canon came out with one, but I think there's a low frame rate on the Canon one, so it's not usable right now.
Yeah, I was disappointed that my 5D Mark II, they cut it off a couple of generations after that. It must not have had some circuitry or something that allowed the control signal to get to it to work with the new computers. And so I couldn't use my camera as a webcam, while you could use the later versions 5D Mark IV and things like that as one. So I think they're chasing that a little bit. I think that takes care of that question. The next one is actually, I promoted this because I think I don't want to leave people behind, and I think there's more than 100 people still listening. And TJ Asher from Minneapolis asked, let's get back to the basics. What is a camera sensor, and how does it work in the first place? And Stuart, you want to take off first, and then I'll add some stuff to it.
Okay, there are different classes of sensors depending on what you're using. But first thing to note is, with one exception, all sensors that we currently use are actually monochrome. There is a filter in front of the monochrome device that then limits which color goes through to which pixel on the sensor. And there's a question by TJ as well about the Blackmagic one, and that's really interesting. So you've got a silicon substrate that is light sensitive. You'll have a optical low pass filter on some cameras in front of it, and an infrared cut filter, which is kind of important. You can get the infrared cut filter removed for different photography effects, but if you're filming in daylight, don't. So you have a combination of filters. Behind the silicon substrate, you will have op amps, like what we mentioned yesterday with preamps for audio. They amplify the signal from, well, effectively what you get inside each pixel is a bucket full of light that creates a voltage, and the voltage is how bright the light was falling on that pixel. So you need to be able to amplify that to a signal level that can be stored in the memory and then pass through to the image processor of the camera. So you'll have, so basically from front to back of a sensor, you have a couple of filters, a light sensitive substrate, amplifiers, memory, and then on some cameras, you will have motors to shift the filter for your IBIS, which is your in-body image stabilization. Next question.
Okay. So that, yeah. So basically, I think the fundamental explain it like I'm five thing is that the sensor is the thing that the light coming through the lens hits and turns the light into a encodable signal that is what's going to show up on your TV set or computer later. You get into all sorts of things that people are insane about, like how many pixels do you have? How many megapixels does the sensor have? There's a lot of debate about how big do those sensors need to be to gather light efficiently and do a good job of creating a picture that is to the specifications of the type of work you're doing. We started out with very small sensors, and when you have very small sensors, like the old camcorders often had 1/3-inch sensors and things that were real small. They were much physically smaller than the full frame sensors that we have now in like DSLRs and things like that. And because of that size, the geometry of the lens projecting the image onto the sensor makes a lot of things happen. You hear often that large sensors allow you to achieve a shallow depth of field and a more cinematic look, whatever that means. I do know that when I was shooting with 1/3-inch sensors in my early days on camcorders, it was incredibly difficult to move anything out of focus in the depth of field, because the small sensor taking that light from the lens and putting it in a very small area necessitated a very small aperture, and the depth of field got huge, so that when DSLRs came out, it was like, oh my gosh, we have big sensors now, and I can play in this new environment of having the subject in the front part of my scene in focus and everything behind them out of focus, which is great as a tool to focus the audience on who you want to have them focused on at the moment they're saying something or doing something important. Let's go around Courtney and then Sky.
Yeah, everything Stuart described is what most modern cameras use, a single chip sensor. Television cameras, so for digital cinema, they like a single chip camera, just for what Bill said, is you get that nice shallow depth of field, and it looks more cinematic, like a piece of film. Has the same characteristics as a single piece of film. But most television cameras have 3-chip matrices in them, and so they have a prism that separates the light. And the chips are smaller, and that's what gives you the extended depth of field that Bill was talking about. And it separates the light through dichroic mirrors and a prism into red, green, and blue, so that there's a separate chip for each color, so that you don't have to have the on-chip filters with the tiny bare layout, which is the layout of the color filters on a single chip camera. So each chip can have its sensors directly next to each other, so they can be much smaller but high resolution. And you find those more in live TV cameras, broadcast cameras, than you do and those are CCD type sensors used to be. Maybe they're now CMOS, but they could build them much tighter resolution in a smaller area. But it gives you a different focal look and a different look and different lenses and different back focus, and you run into a whole different set of problems with a 3-chip camera than you do with a single chip camera.
Yeah, but the truth is that you don't get color without the RGB values that you can combine electronically to make all the other colors, which is why you usually have 4 aspects of any video signal: the red, green, blue information, and more importantly, the luminance information, which is how bright that pixel should be, that makes things look natural and not flat in the world sky. And then Stuart again.
So 2,000 years ago, we're all sitting around a campfire. Somebody tells a story, and we hear about a thing. And now somehow we started capturing it. We put it up on the side of the wall with charcoal, and then we found a way to put color up there. So anyway, we're not doing anything different than we did 2,000 years ago. We're just putting new technology to it. So and again, I go back to Brian with the audio and the earlier in today's conversation about we're moving audio wave, or what is it, airwaves, and how do we get it from one point to another point, which still is irrelevant to getting the idea from my head to your head. And now we're just trying to figure out how to do that. So I love the technology question, but again, these different tools have evolved either because of economics or because of a need. And so that's where which tool is for the right job. It's dependent upon your ability to use it. So with regards to the 3/4 inch chip, I was actually going to ask about Stuart. Does this actually add more light? This is the Metabones. Does this actually allow more light to come through?
Ooh, fun. Stuart, have fun with this. Go for it.
Okay,
Because
there's a couple of points there.
The f-stop question.
We'll go back for actually a little bit older than that, Sky.
2,000
years ago, the dyes were already set in stone or sprayed on stone. Some of the colors that we find used even in fashion, in artwork and what have you, date back more than 6,500 years. Some of the most vivid colors you'll find were actually developed by the Egyptians, which is absolutely fabulous stuff. And we can trace through the artwork and the standards of what went into the colors for painting, what went into the colors for clothing, to what went into the colors for something like a fluorescent dot on a CRT screen that set our both our chrominance and our gamma curves, and yeah, the gamut of a screen. Okay, but that also relates to the dyes that we used in the filters in front of sensors, such as on the Bayer pattern, or on the red, green and blue filters in a 3-chip camera, or if you really want to confuse people, both the substrates on 35mm film and a Fovean sensor camera. Now, Fovean sensor is a little strange in that instead of being the same layers we talked about before...
Sky, put your lens on, you're getting dust in there.
Oh yes, please do. Please, lens. But a Fovean sensor actually has a layer of red, green and blue pixels, one behind the other, and each is sensitive to a different color. Now, for Mr. Sky, the Speed Booster. Firstly, Speed Booster is a brand by Metabones. What the device is a device that was invented for astronomy, to go on the end of a telescope, and the class of device is actually called a focal reducer. And the job a focal reducer does is to shrink the image circle that is projected by a lens. So in the case of the lens and camera that Sky is holding up at the moment, that lens produces an image circle for either a Super 35 or a full frame sensor. So the image circle might be this sort of size, but the sensor in the camera is tinier. So by shrinking the image circle down to just cover the size of the sensor, you can effectively compress the light into a smaller area, making it appear brighter. So you don't get more light in, but you project it onto a smaller area. So you're fitting that light into a smaller area. So
I always think about it like
brighter.
burning leaves with a magnifying glass, right? If the
Exactly the
if the
same.
light if the
Exactly
magnifying
the
glass
same.
is far away, you get a diffused thing and it's not going to burn it. As you bring it closer, it gets stronger and stronger until you can burn the dry leaf, and the kids have fun.
Yep,
And
and
your
Bill, and the
camera goes
opposite
up
to
in
that
flames.
is a tele expander, which is used when you want to turn a zoom lens from say 100 mil into 200 mil, which literally expands the image circle that's projected onto the sensor.
Yeah, so there's a trade-off. So you add the speed booster,
Yeah, it
it
gets
makes
darker.
the focal area smaller.
Yep.
So you get less pixels covered, but you get them to be a bit brighter by looking at that.
There is also one other advantage of putting those in front of the camera, and that is it moves the rear element of the lens closer to the sensor, so the light hitting the sensor is more parallel, and you're less likely
Mickey,
to
you
get
wanna-
purple
you wanna spot-
fringing
you want-
for
there
it,
you go.
especially, yeah. So the light moves parallel from the back of the glass to the sensor surface, so you get less of the drift between red, green, and blue because the different colors at different frequencies have different focal lengths, which is why film substrate for 35mm film has a specific order for whether it's blue, green, and red in the order of the film construction. And there's a slight focus difference from the back of the lens to the film, and that order kept all three colors in focus. In something like the early Blackmagic cameras where it's all on a single plane and people complained about purple fringing, that's because the blue and the red were out of focus compared to the green.
So your trade-off is, what do you want? Do you want the shallow depth of field of the full frame sensor edge to edge, or do you want the brighterness of making that smaller and giving you an extra stop of light? Courtney?
I think one thing to consider is that with the speed booster there, you might lose edge detail around the edges. Your edge focus is not going to be quite as good because the resolution of a lot of lenses, unless they're really great lenses, are not as sharp at the edges as they are in the center. So since you're now bringing those edges into the sensor, which were normally outside the sensor, you're now going to have less sharp things at the edge of the frame.
And welcome to the world of video, which is always trade-offs. You get one thing and you give up a little other thing constantly. That's what we're all.
Bill, can I add one final point on a speed booster?
Certainly.
They don't make lenses wider. I've seen it written all over the internet. People say, "Oh, fit this speed booster. It makes the lens wider." The lens has a fixed field of view. What using a focal reducer does is allow you to access more of that you've lost because of the different in image circle. So don't confuse the two. The lens can't get wider. A 24mm is a 24mm. A 50mm is a 50mm. But whether you can access all of that 50mm field of view, that's what you use the focal reducer to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you get that leads into crop factors of different kinds of lens arrangements.
Oh, yeah.
A particular lens on a particular cropped sensor will give you a different apparent focal length than using it on a full frame sensor that was designed for it. So,
and to your point, Bill, I have not taken the lens off of the Metabones, and now I see what that fingernail or fingerprint is on my Metabones. It's like, huh.
Yeah, this is why, Stuart and I both went a little nuts when you took it off and were waving your camera around. I think both of us have locked into our brain, if the lens comes off, a cover has to go on instantly, and you worry
Absolutely
about the number
agree.
of seconds.
But because I took it off, this fingerprint has been on there for probably a year.
Well,
Sky, are you
do some
aware
research
that
about how to clean sensors. It's that you can mess that up real easy.
That's
Oh,
on the
yeah.
MetaBones.
Sky, are you aware that the MetaBone Speed Booster has a back focus adjustment built into it?
I am, and it also has a USB-C port that you can update it. Like, I've not played with that yet, but
adjusting that back focus will improve the quality of the image you get out of any of those things. It's worth taking the time to read the MetaBones manual and do it. And pretty much every focal reducer uses the same system. But don't forget to lock down the grub screw when you're done.
I didn't know that was called a grub screw. That's a great thing. All right, I think we've covered the basics. I hope everybody now has a pretty good feeling for how the basic sensor operates and how it interacts with the lens choices that you make in order to get the kind of look out of a camera that you are seeking. All that said, we're going to move to James Babbitt's question. Please comment on the Sony A7 sensors with backside illumination and dual gain levels. And I'm not familiar with those, so I can't help anybody at all. Does anybody, Stuart, do you have any thoughts on these particular Sony beasts?
Yeah. Sony isn't the only one, although their backside illumination, it's literally how they charge the pixel on the sensor to make it turn on. But there's dual gain is found on Sony, Panasonic. I think there's a Blackmagic that does it now. What it basically means is you've got the sensor substrate that's where the pixels are, and you've got two amplifier circuits off the back of it. One is the native ISO that we all know and familiar with. One is a second native ISO that will often be several dB gain higher. So you'll have a point in some cameras where they'll switch between the two, and you'll have some cameras that can actually access both at the same time and give you a wider dynamic range through it.
Yeah, basically when you hear like the Blackmagic Pocket Camera 6K has dual native ISOs, a native ISO means that you'll get the least amount of noise if the camera is set at that ISO value. And then anything above or below that is actually above that, because you're adding more amplification to get more gain out of it. It will be progressively noisier. Dual ISO is what Stuart's talking about, which is that there's a lower ISO that you can shoot in a bright circumstance and get the minimum amount of noise, but there'll also be usually one, we have heard 600 native low ISO and then 3200 high ISO. That means if you're shooting at 3200, it's not applying that gain. It's doing this magic to give you the cleanest possible signal at a brighter sensor setting. Okay, hopefully that took care of all of that. Next, Sky wants us to dive into the mystical craziness of bokeh. And you've spelled it one of the interesting ways. Term out of Japan originally. Most people, when they're talking about bokeh, talk about things in the distance, particularly lights that have a specular highlight when you have a deep field of view. But when you move to a shallow depth of field, that point of light blooms out. You often see it with the actual shutter arrays. You can get like 5-sided, 6-sided, 7 things. Really good bokeh. Some people love it with a completely round circle, but it's an aesthetic determination of what out of focus elements look like in your picture. That's what really the term is talking about, however you get there. And Stuart will, I'm sure, have more technical explanations, and Mickey too.
No, you got it pretty much spot on, mate. It's artistic choice. Just like how you just mentioned about having the iris wide open and what have you. There's some people who I've worked with who won't shoot with the iris stopped down at all because they don't like the look of the thing. But you watch an action film or a sci-fi, especially a sci-fi set in space, all of the action shots are outside as the sun goes past. They will deliberately put 5, even 3 iris blades on objects in the distance that are out of focus just to make it look pretty. The same with on the lens face. It's artistic choice. That's all it is. It's not a technical thing. Some lenses are nice. Some are nice because they're not good.
And if your camera is focusing throughout the entire range, you won't get any bokeh at all. It doesn't exist until you have a depth of field set such that things outside the depth of field blur out, essentially. Mickey?
So it's also depth of field like Guy is showing here.
Very, very much. The guy's image is exactly perfect. You're seeing the subject well lit in perfect focus, and the lights, which are probably, if you focus that left side of the image, those are just little tiny points of light, and the camera lens is blowing them up into these beautiful, glowing, out of focus balls, and that's the look of bokeh. And people love that when you do it like in that. Very pretty artistic shot. Courtney?
Also, you can easily tell from the sorry, my microphone got knocked down.
No, you're there.
From the shape of those circles of light in the background, whether you're using an anamorphic lens or a spherical lens, because an anamorphic lens will give you an oblong shaped circle, and spherical lenses, which is what you're showing there, give you a round, perfectly round one.
And you're starting to see why cinematographers have to know so much, because exactly the same lens with two different internal construction will deliver different bokeh. And if your artistic palette is such that you want perfectly round, or, here we've got some little not perfectly roundness, those are all aesthetic choices that a director of photography and his or her cinematographer will choose to get exactly what they want to show the audience artistically. Complex thing.
Well,
there is one other sneaky thing about bokeh, and especially in the examples that Guy just showed us. You don't have to light the background. Right? You're only lighting the foreground for like where the guy was
Good
standing.
point.
The background is all out of a blur and it's lights in the back distance. You don't have to go and put some 4K lights down there to light up the building. It's blurred out.
You can lose the grip truck rental and the generators and all the electricians and grips and cameras.
You can leave the grip truck in the shot.
Yeah.
It's dark back there.
Mickey has a thought.
Yeah, definitely. Like bokeh is essentially just like the visual aesthetic quality of the background. How it's more of how the lens reacts to things that are out of focus than the sensor itself. Different kinds of bokeh would work differently depending on the story you're trying to tell. Like say you could have some vintage, like maybe Russian lenses that give you this like weird streaky bokeh that might be good for say like a dream sequence, but that might not work well for say a corporate video wherein you have talking heads. So that it's just another tool that a cinematographer can use.
Let's have a guy run back through those shots, which is showing a lot of cool depth of field, and let's pin him, because this is a nice feeling of how you can, again, focus on the main subjects by blurring the background. Now, these don't have specular highlights in it, but look at what it's doing to the loveliness of the leaves. It's really letting you see the subject. You still experience the environment they're in, but you're not distracted by...
Well, and that's where in recent days when the DSLR became the go-to camera, and the 24 to 170, because it gave you a shallow depth of field, and so that's the other thing that we're seeing here is it became a style very, very quickly.
But all these they have a central a subject or group of subjects that they want you to focus on. And the background is less important. To throw a shallow depth of field onto a scene where there's nothing there to focus on is, I think, a misuse of the possibility. You don't need a big aperture for a landscape shot, unless the grass in the middle distance, you want to focus on that for some reason. It's usually with shots with people. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, with all that fad of having everything shallow, everybody is probably aware of a small movie by Stanley Kubrick called Barry Lyndon, which was shot with a very fast lens, very wide open, with candles and reflectors and lights outside the windows and what have you. But here's the thing, go back and look at most of Kubrick's work and everything is in focus. He was a master of using deep focus to tell the story. Again, it's whether it's in focus or out of focus is an artistic choice.
Well, again, that's the
And
Wes
people will
Wes
keep
Anderson.
forgetting that.
The Wes Anderson. I don't know
Wes
if everything's
Anderson's
in.
different. Yeah.
Well, depending on the film that he uses or the show that he's telling about. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, Ansel Adams, the famous photographer, everything had to be tack sharp because he was doing mountains in the background and these compositions that had foregrounds that were equally interesting, and he needed everything in focus to tell his story. So that takes care of, I think, bokeh. I think we've covered it pretty well. And we're down to the last question. TJ Asher asks, can we discuss the 12K sensor in the new Blackmagic camera? It seems it's not a normal Bayer pattern. How are they getting 12K out of this thing? And I think I remember Stuart getting excited about being able to discuss this.
Yeah, I'm just moving things around so I can actually bring it up on the screen once I find the right input on.
Alex has been
Remix.
trying to get us to 9 o'clock, and so we only got a minute and a half left. So dive in.
This is how complex it is, and I'm just going to zoom in so people can see. This is the first thing I was able to find that actually has information on the sensor itself, because I wanted to look for it because it hasn't shown up. So I'm just quickly zooming in, and I will just pan across a little bit.
Guy also has something that he's
should be large enough for you to see the sensor information, the pattern that TJ is asking about. Where a normal Bayer sensor is a completely different pattern, this one's actually got what's called white pixels in there. So it's separating red, green, blue, and luminance into 4 separate channels instead of having them through the 3 RGB channels.
Okay, so if you want more technical details on that's the place to start. Guy also has the Blackmagic page has a whole ton of things about these 12K sensors. And the last thing, for those of you who are interested in studying more about bokeh, it's not really BOCA, it's I've seen it BOKAH, BOKKAH. That's the more traditional spelling out of Japan, where I think the thing first came into use. And I think that takes us to 9 o'clock, which means that it's time to shift over to Alex's next meeting. For those of you who are going to see us over there, thank you for coming to office hours today. We appreciate it. We will be back here tomorrow morning, same time, same location.
Courtney,